In a country where you have many religions, many ethnicities, many ethnic groups, many values, the government cannot fold its arms and see unguided individuals trying to take advantage um, of the differences in values to cause disharmony. And this is why this ministry in particular decided that it is important to sanitize the social media, scene. Sanitization does not necessarily mean legislation, and it does not mean by any imagination stifling of the press or the media. No. We are going to have a media as free as anywhere in the world, but we are must have a responsibly free media. And that's our goal. Yes, once in a while, there might be need to draw that, there might be that very delicate balance between national security and the freedom of the press or the freedom of the individual. But I make bold to say that it's one of the freest country to live in the world.
Well, that's what we're sinking our teeth into, press freedoms and, of course, responsibility. Our guest this morning is Alwaraf Sajani, who is the head of Transparency International. You're welcome to Sunrise Daily this morning.
Thank you. Good morning.
Well, when you look at the assessment of many countries and how the media operates within them, when you look at the media in Nigeria, you'll be told that, oh, we have a very vibrant media with many independent houses. How come is it then that we're doing so poorly on the ranking of press freedoms? Reporters Without Borders says we're 120 out of 180 countries ranked. That's not so good, is it?
Absolutely. Well, the reasons are very obvious. The intolerance of some powerful forces, which includes some government official and even some powerful individual in the society, continue to make it difficult to have press freedom in Nigeria, because once you expose corruption, once you expose maladministration, once you try to write things that are even built on credible sources, some people, they will feel they are exposing their bad deed, and therefore you see this constant harassment, attack, and persecution, as well as discrimination. We have so many examples. For example, some people did investigative journalism, which is really giving credence to the report they wrote, exposing corruption. What do they get? They get harassed, they get intimidated, they even sometimes get detained. They detain them without any legal provision or any reason to do that. If you also write any report that did not perhaps please the authority, then they'll start calling you all sorts of names. In fact, they would prompt up charges, and they will tell you that you are even a terrorist, you are inciting public, or you are disturbing the public, peace, or they will say you are even participating in unlawful assembly. So all these kind of things constitute to the threat that the freedom of expression and journalists they also experience. You have a situation whereby because of impunity, some powerful people or government official will even order demolition of entire media house, like we have seen in Oyo State, where one of the FM stations was actually demolished. We have also seen how invasion of some media houses like Framing Time, Daily Trust. We have seen number of time their journalists and even their environment were actually embedded by security agencies, simply because they expose wrongdoing, or they try to at least enlighten and educate Nigerians about some of these issues that are happening, or even covering brutality that some of the Obazilio security do, because we have instances where journalists, other photojournalists or reporters were thoroughly beaten simply because they were trying to film and snap brutality taking place. So with this kind of environment, with this kind of shrinking space for journalists and the media to operate, there's no way you can be ranked as one of the best country that allows freedom of expression, because you actually want to doctor and constrain freedom of expression, despite the fact that we have legal framework like United Nations Covenant on human rights, which clearly gives right to even the state to protect, not actually undermine or to arrest or to violate the right of the citizens. You also have African Charter, peoples and that allow also the state to ensure that it protects the citizens. Our constitution is very clear. Our constitution clearly states that the state must protect, not brutalize, not undermine, not arrest, not intimidate the citizens, because they are carrying out their lawful work. And our constitution is very clear. The constitution empowers the journalists and the media to be able to expose corruption. In fact, that's one of the most fundamental responsibility of the media. And when they do that, government, instead of appreciating that investigative report has been done that will even assist government to recover money, like in the case of Cross River, the guy that was detained and arrested, Abba Jalingo, until after Amnesty International continued to shout and raise this issue. He was just arrested because he has exposed corruption that turned into billions, of naira for the state. So instead of the state to even appreciate that what the journalist was doing was a very patriotic work that is exposing people who have cheated the state and the people, they end up putting him, in jail. Jafar exposed corruption and he got harassed and intimidated. Ahmed Sadika, he has been constantly harassed, intimidated for exposing, a lot of corruption in the security sector. So if you look at the way and manner in which Nigerian official responds to freedom of expression and the media is such that, there's no way you can have a good rating. Recently, they are trying to, introduce, another bill that will actually even undermine or in fact contradict the constitution, which actually empowers and allows the journalists to freely, carry out their responsibility as responsible journalists.
Which one of the bills are you talking about? The social media?
They have a social media that they want to,
well, we'll come to social media bill in a moment, but if you're to look at it in terms of our progression, because there was a time in this country when journalism was a really risky job. It's not to say that the risk has been totally eliminated, but when journalists were held in underground cells and things of the sort, when it was a real danger to be a journalist. A lot of people argue that we're coming out of those days, and they were saying that the freedoms are a little better. Is it really getting better, or has it gotten better than gotten worse?
No, actually, if you do what those previous journalists were doing, investigative reporting to expose corruption, to expose maladministration, to expose all sorts of devious things that is going on, all sorts of scandal that is rocking in the system, you will also experience the same thing. And that is why, like I mentioned to you, even now, if you do your work as a journalist, as a media, if they didn't harass you or attack you physically, verbally, they will insult you, they will abuse you, they will say all sorts of things, or they will, sponsor some, unfortunately, some idle people who they will hire them to start just attacking you, either in the social media or any other place. Today, if you release any report that is not favorable to the government, some people in government, they will use taxpayers' money to go and recruit some people to start insulting you without actually countering based on credible, data and evidence what you have written, But rather than responding, to some of those issues, they will resort to insulting and abusing and blackmailing, and in fact say that you are actually working for terrorists, just like the blackmail.
And CSOs will also
recently.
know about that, because they are also almost along the same line of the work the journalists do. We rely heavily on some of the works that CSOs do as well, and in recent times you have come under attack, isn't that correct?
Definitely. If you are really a real civil society activist working towards, ensuring good governance, transparency, and accountability, it will not be spared by some of these powerful individuals, whether from the government or from private sector or from, even, powerful politicians. If you expose their dubious deed, their dubious action, definitely you will go under attack. They will start calling terrorists, just like how shameful they are, to now start calling, human rights activists that are now been working for, Boko Haram or terrorists. This is just to tell you how silly, how, unserious some of these, officials are.
I'm going to ask you to hold your thoughts. Let's quickly swing over to Lagos, where my colleagues have another guest, Ayo and Coyote.
Yes, thank you, Malpa. We have with us a legal practitioner, Matthew Booker. Thank you so much for your time this morning. Well, I would want to, of course, you've listened to some of the things that our guest in Abuja has said. First of all, what's your reaction to the issue of press freedom and responsibility from his own perspective? What's your reaction?
Well, I think he has given the trajectory of what the press has passed through over the years and the incessant attacks that you've had on press freedom. But I want to look at it from the perspective that if you look at the topic that you have, you cannot have press freedom without press responsibility. Those are things that you must discuss hand in hand. But first of all, if you look at the position of the press in Nigeria, what you have on paper is quite impressive in the sense that you have a right guaranteed under Section 39, which empowers the press to operate freely. You also have the provision of Section 22 of the Constitution, which mandates the press to give effect to the fundamental objectives and directive principles of states. Now, that is Section 22 to me even gives the press a larger latitude to operate and call government to account, because if you look at the entirety of paragraph of chapter 2 of the Constitution, you see that that is a chapter that provides for a whole lot of what good governance should be. Talk about corruption, provision of healthcare, provision of all, and Section 22 based the propagation of those fundamental principles on the shoulders of the press. Now, apart from that, you also have Article 9 of the African Charter on Human and People's Rights, which by Section 12 of our Constitution, having been domesticated, forms part of our laws. Now, these are legal instruments that empowers the press to operate freely and unrestrained. Now, that is what you have on paper. Just like what you have with your guest in Abuja, our guest in Abuja who just mentioned what has been happening generally. There are times that you have clashes between members of the press and the government, and members of the press and other individuals who feel maligned, who feel that certain responsible reportage has not been carried out, and would want to take that on the press. Now, I would feel that the responsibility aspect of it is what the Nigerian Press Council Act seeks to correct. In 2010, I was part of lawyers who actually challenged the Nigerian Press Council Act in court before Justice Lehman. And Justice Lehman set aside that act on the basis that the provision of the act infringed on the provision of Section 39 of the Constitution. In 2015, the Court of Appeal overturned that decision of the Federal High Court and gave effect and validity to the Nigerian Press Council Act. Now, I have taken time to look at the Nigerian Press Council Act because even when we challenged it, our challenge of it was not because of the fact that it seeks to regulate journalism. Our challenge at that point was because members of the council that will now regulate journalism were to be appointed by the executive. And we felt that that would be an indirect way to gag the press. But if you look at the law as it is, beginning generally from Section 17 of it, which provides that you must be a registered journalist to practice journalism. You have Section 21, which criminalizes once you practice journalism in Nigeria without being registered, it's a criminal offense. You have Section 33, which also criminalizes the act of journalism, practicing journalism without disclosing returns and all of that. Now, that law on its own, the Nigerian Press Council Act, as it stands, it may have its shortfalls. But if you look at the law the way it is structured, that law is enough to provide for responsible journalism.
Then going by the provisions of the law, just
Of the
as
law,
you said,
correct.
do you see journalists, do you see the journalism practice being according to that law as at today?
Well, the purpose of that law is, as I said, to regulate. If there was no problem with practice of journalism, there wouldn't have been any need for that law. Now, that law came into being because there were people in the society, and even some journalists who felt that some people were going beyond their brief. Some people were beginning to, some journalists were beginning to destroy people by irresponsible reportage, whatever that means. Now, that was the purpose for that law. Now, as I said, on paper, you have all of that. Coming to the practical reality of what we have on ground, he has mentioned a whole lot of issues. He has mentioned specific instances. You have the Agbajalingos case, which he mentioned. You have the Showeris case, which coincidentally I was part of the prosecuting team. That's at the Federal High Court. He also mentioned the issue of the gentleman in Abuja. Okay. I've forgotten his name, who was convicted. Yeah. Now, in all of this, you discover that you still have the presence of the judiciary. Now, Mwagwe said, asked the gentleman in Abuja a question as to whether we are better off than we were before. I think that we can say we are a little bit better off because now you have the involvement of the court. And sometimes you don't just get to understand the nitty-gritties of these cases until you are fully involved in them. I'm not involved in Agbajalingo's case, so I don't know much about it. I'm not involved in the gentleman's case in Abuja. I don't know about it. But what I know is that there was a trial and then there was a conviction. Right. So whichever way you look at it, it was not just the executive carrying out an act against the journalist. He was subjected to judicial.
So you're making comparison between the military,
era
and democracy,
and now.
But then, if you also look at some of the processes, sorry, Kade, if you look at some of the processes of this, many people wonder, especially in the Agbajalingo case,
yes,
are wondering why it should even have occurred that way in the first place, because the man just simply reported what he saw, and there was no one to come out to refute. Rather, he was picked up. That's on the surface what many people say.
I share the same sentiment with you because from what I've read on paper, I felt for him. That's the truth from what I read on paper. And that is why, because of my experience in prosecution of cases in court or defense of cases in court, I find it difficult to just make statements on cases that I have not really had the opportunity to see processes. On paper, from what we read in the news and all of that, I felt that what the gentleman passed through within that very long period of time before he was even granted bail and all of that was really not the way to go. But as I said, if you read the case of President Federal Republic of Nigeria versus Malam Isa, which I'm talking about at the Court of Appeal, the Court of Appeal made the statement that the right to freedom of the press comes with a corresponding responsibility to cross-check the accuracy of your information before you dish it out. Now, one of the problems we are now facing, which generally would be a bigger problem as we go on, is even the issue of fake news and the social media. While it is easy to regulate the print media, regulate outfits like this, it is difficult to regulate what you have out there in the social media, because and we see that happening all the time. I will just bring in a little example here. This discussion we have on the issue of the press, you belong to the press, you're doing very well. Now, what you have decided to do, even as it relates to this topic, is to bring us from different walks of life to have a balanced view of this topic. Now, nobody, for whatever reason, will fault you for that. Nobody will do that. It is a fact that today you have people in government who feel that they love Nigeria more than any other person who is outside government. And that is why when you find people, those in the press, who are going by the dictates of Section 22 of the Constitution to even bring to bear the provisions of Chapter 2 of the Constitution, which itself is non-justiciable. So the only people that can propagate it are journalists. Now, when they see people doing that, they feel that, well, you don't love Nigeria as much as they love Nigeria. But if we begin to look at Nigeria as a general project, and we begin to take fine examples from, with what happens in places like the United States, you discover that we are better off discussing issues than having this stiff position of saying, don't say anything because I am in government and I feel that you don't love Nigeria as much as I love Nigeria.
Okay.
Now, another example which the gentleman in Abuja mentioned, which I also believe is true, is if you get rid of corruption, or if you are a government that is not corrupt, you will not be bothered about what people say about you. You will not be bothered. Now, one of the reasons why you see that you see people in government really getting bothered about whether or not their acts are reported is because of the is because you have people who expose corruption and maybe misgovernance. But if you don't have any of such things, it will be. I mean, you won't be bothered about what people report. So we should follow the fine examples of what we see elsewhere. I think last year we saw in the media how Donald Trump in the United States had an issue with a CNN reporter in the White House. The man was expelled. He immediately went to court, and that same day, the court made an order stopping the White House from refusing him access to the White House, and he came back immediately. So I think that it is time for also the judiciary to step, which of course has been happening. The judiciary has tried as much as possible to strike a balance, and I feel that should continue because the executive, whether you like it or not, sometimes will go overboard. The only institution that will guarantee the freedom of the press is the judiciary. And at that point, when you come before the judiciary, you have the right of the press. And anybody who films by line will now look at it and say, look, the court will now look at the right and the responsibility and see whether or not the press is going in accordance with the dictates of Section 39, and whether or not the court is, the press is going in within the dictates of Article 9, and also whether or not the court, the press is going by what is provided in Section 22. So that's my position on that.
All right, you've dissected the issues so well. So we'll go to Abuja, but before that, I would like to thank you so much, Mr. Matthew Barker, a legal practitioner, for giving us this perspective to the responsibility of press in Nigeria.
Thank you.
Thanks so much. Markwe.
Thank you, Kaide. Let's quickly go through this report. Endangered Voices, attack on freedom of expression in Nigeria, done by Amnesty International. If you go through the number of journalists who have been arrested and detained here, you see Jones Abiri, you see Mary Ekere, you see Kofi Bartels. A number of them, if you look through, you'll find that the majority of them are people who do online blogging and things of the sort. Mostly people who are online. And we now see the social media bill. Our guest in Lagos has said it's going to be one of the most difficult areas to regulate. Do you think at all that there should be any regulation for social media?
Well, you have to understand that, if you are running a social media, you don't need to operate in Nigeria. You can operate from anywhere, and, it's a waste of public resources and time that you use to do quality work to now be wasting your time on what will not work, because you have so many of these online that are not based in Nigeria. They are registered somewhere else, and they are interested in African issue, they are interested on Nigerian issue. Look, if you don't have anything to hide, there's no need to worry yourself. Secondly, you know that if you do any defamatory report or any report that is not credible, you can simply go to court. If you believe that a particular media house has done something that is not okay for you, you go to court. It is there, then you will now know whether your right has been violated or not. Secondly, journalists in Nigeria, the one that I know, they are all registered with Nigerian Union of Journalists. They have their data, they have their information, and there's need to also differentiate between people who have opinion, writing. Some people write to different media houses, even including government-owned paper, to express opinion on certain national issue. That does not make you to be a journalist. So, but the point we are making here is
But we're in the era of citizen journalism.
Yes, well, that's what I'm saying. If you believe that somebody has written something that is not,
True,
you can challenge that, And
how willing are people to follow through with the process? To follow through with the process in court?
For example, you will have known where the source is. You will have known the person who has written that. You initiate illegal action against him. It's a very simple thing. But what we see here, all this intolerance, all this is simply because somebody has carried out his responsibility as enshrined by our Constitution to expose corruption. In most cases, it's bothering about issues of exposing corruption, human rights abuses. If you are writing to praise government every day or to praise all these powerful people with impunity in the society, nobody is going to trump you for any criminal charges or for any terrorism. But today,
just quickly, well, sadly, we're totally out of time. I was going to ask you, how we can make things better, but. Yeah. We have to thank you for sharing your thoughts this morning. We hope that, that with discussions of matters like this, that perhaps we'll be able to find solutions to improving press freedom and ensuring that we carry our responsibility as seriously as we ought to. Anwar Afsajani is head of Transparency International. Thank you for coming on Sunrise today.
Thank you very much.
The program continues with another matter at hand. Please stay with us.